They waited until the hallway was empty. 4 of them, juniors all over 6 feet, the kind of boys who had learned that the space between the last bell and the parking lot belonged to whoever was willing to use it, stepped in front of the new teacher as she rounded the corner of the B-wing corridor with a stack of graded essays under one arm and a travel mug in her other hand. The one in front said something. She kept walking. He stepped into her path and pushed. The essays scattered. The travel mug hit the linoleum. She went down on one knee. They laughed. 3 seconds. That was how long it lasted before they turned and walked away, certain of what they had established. They had no idea who they had just put their hands on. They had no idea that the woman now collecting her papers from the floor of the B-wing corridor had spent 8 years teaching men and women how to do things to the human body that these 4 boys had never conceived of and prayed they would never meet. They had no idea that she had not gone down because she couldn't stop it. She had gone down because she had decided to, and they had absolutely no idea what was coming next week. The day Sergeant First Class Maya Torres submitted her retirement paperwork, her commanding officer read it twice, set it on his desk, and looked at her across the width of his office at Fort Bragg. "You're 41 years old," he said. "Yes, sir." She said, "You're my best SERI instructor." "I know, sir." He looked at the paperwork again. SERI, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. The program that trains soldiers, and specifically the soldiers most likely to find themselves in the worst possible situations, how to endure, resist, and return. Maya had run the program for 8 of her 19 years in the Army. She had trained 11 cohorts. She had pushed men and women through 72-hour deprivation scenarios, stress inoculation exercises, interrogation resistance, and wilderness survival sequences in conditions that were deliberately, systematically designed to find the exact boundary of a person's capacity and then work that boundary until it moved. She had been one of only 4 women ever to run the program as lead instructor. She had been offered a promotion to Master Sergeant twice and declined it both times because accepting would have moved her into administration and away from the instruction, which was the only part she cared about. She had grown up in Laredo, Texas, the middle child of 5, daughter of a school librarian and a mechanic who had met in a community college English class and married 3 months later and raised their children in a house where books were non-negotiable and competence was the family currency. Her mother, Elena, had taught her that the most dangerous person in any room was the one who had decided, with complete clarity, what they were willing to do and what they were not, and who communicated neither. Her father, Hector, had taught her that the body was a tool, and tools required maintenance and respect. And if you understood your tools better than anyone else understood theirs, the outcome of most situations was predetermined. She had carried both lessons into the Army at 22, and they had never once failed her. What she had decided at 41, with 19 years of service behind her, and a medical early retirement she hadn't asked for but had accepted without self-pity, a knee injury from a training exercise 2 years prior that had repaired well but not fully, was that she was not done teaching. She was simply changing classrooms. She had a degree in English literature from a state school she'd finished on night courses and extended duty. She had a secondary teaching certificate she'd earned during a leave of absence 4 years ago on a private conviction that this day would eventually come. She had applied to Eastview Regional High School in the spring and been hired in August as an 11th grade English teacher on the strength of an interview that the principal later described to the assistant principal as the calmest 40 minutes he had ever spent with a first-year teacher candidate. She arrived at Eastview in September carrying a canvas tote bag and a marked-up copy of the district curriculum and a set of expectations she had not shared with anyone. She did not talk about her background, not because she was hiding it, because it hadn't come up, because the students in her classes asked about the homework and the grading policy and whether she curved, and none of those questions required a resume. She wore plain clothes, dark slacks, button-down shirts in muted colors, flat shoes with good traction, and she spoke in a register that was precise and level and unhurried, and she stood in her classroom like someone who has spent decades occupying space in full knowledge of what was in it. The other teachers noticed this about her without being able to name it. The newer teachers found her reassuring to be near. The students found her difficult to read, which made a certain kind of student nervous and a certain kind of student very interested. And then there were the 4 boys in the B-wing hallway. Eastview Regional High School had a problem that was not technically a secret. It had been a problem for 3 years, documented in 3 separate incident reports, discussed in 2 faculty meetings, mentioned in a school board session as a behavioral challenge under active review. The 4 boys at its center were not failing students, not anonymous, not difficult to identify. They were athletes, 2 of them starters on the football team, 1 on the wrestling squad, 1 who simply moved through the building with the particular ease of someone who had never been made to stop. Their grades were adequate. Their parents were present, engaged, and had attended every meeting that had been called about their sons, with the particular combination of concern and defensiveness that made resolution difficult. The previous year's vice principal had transferred to another district. The current one, a man named Robert Fenner, had the tense, overextended energy of someone managing a situation he had inherited and had not yet solved. The incidents had a pattern. They targeted teachers who were new, who were perceived as soft, who had not yet established the specific authority that some classrooms take months to build. They targeted substitutes reliably. They had made one first-year teacher cry in the parking lot after school and had watched her drive away 2 months later when she did not return from winter break. They operated in the threshold spaces, hallways, stairwells, the 5 minutes between the last bell and adult supervision, with the precision of people who had learned where the cameras were and where the witnesses weren't. Maya Torres had been at Eastview for 6 weeks when they identified her. She was new. She was quiet. She was small, 5'4", slender, the kind of woman who reads as unimposing to people who make quick assessments. She had not raised her voice in class. She had not sent anyone to the office. She had, from the outside, none of the markers that made the 4 boys in the B-wing hallway look elsewhere. What they did not know was that Maya Torres had spent 8 years training people in controlled but genuinely extreme conditions to handle being targeted. What they did not know was that the quiet was not the absence of capability. It was the management of it. What they did not know was that she had seen them watching her for 2 weeks, had tracked the pattern, had identified the location and the timing and the personnel, and had made a decision, informed, deliberate, and characteristically precise about how to respond. She had let it happen, not because she couldn't stop it, not because she was afraid. She had let it happen because she needed a room with a witness and a clock and a principal who had already documented 3 incidents. And she needed the boys to have done the thing again before the thing she was going to do next would be fully, permanently effective. The essays scattered. The travel mug hit the linoleum. She went down on one knee. She collected the papers while the laughter faded and the footsteps retreated, and then she stood and retrieved her travel mug from the floor and walked to the main office and said to the administrative assistant, in a voice that had the particular quality of someone filing a report rather than expressing distress, "I need to speak with Vice Principal Fenner, and I'll need the B-wing security footage from the last 20 minutes. Here is where the story stops being about what was done to her. Here is where it becomes about what she did. Vice Principal Fenner was a man who had been waiting with increasing anxiety for the situation with the 4 boys to resolve itself or escalate to a point where resolution was forced. He had been hoping, without admitting it, for neither option. He was a decent man in a difficult position, and he had made the mistake that decent people in difficult positions sometimes make, which is to manage the discomfort of a problem rather than the problem itself. Maya Torres sat across from him in the orange plastic chair opposite his desk, the same chair that students sat in when they were in trouble, which she had chosen because she was comfortable in functional spaces, and she placed a 1-page document on his desk. It was not a complaint form. It was not a written account of the incident, though she had written that out separately and placed it in the folder she set beside the document. It was a proposal, 3 pages, single-spaced, developed over the preceding 2 weeks while she had watched the 4 boys identify her and waited for them to move. It outlined a behavioral intervention program for the specific pattern of incidents at Eastview, not a punitive response, though consequences were included, but a structural response, one that addressed the conditions that made the behavior possible and the conditions that would make it impossible going forward. She had drawn on protocols she had developed in the Army for managing high-risk personnel dynamics within closed institutional systems. She had adapted them, carefully, to a secondary school environment. She had cited 3 published studies in adolescent behavioral intervention. She had included a month-by-month implementation timeline. Fenner read the first page. He turned to the second. He looked up at her over the top of the document. "You wrote this," he said. "When?" "Over the last 2 weeks. she said. He looked at her. He was recalibrating. She could see, running a rapid revision of the category he had placed her in since September, the quiet new English teacher, the one who hadn't sent anyone to the office. He was understanding slowly that the quiet was not what he had thought it was. "What's your background?" he said. It was not an accusatory question. It was the question of a man who realized he had not asked it before, and should have. She told him. Not everything. Not in detail. 19 years, Army. 8 years as a CERE instructor. The nature of the work without the classified particulars. She said it the way she said everything. Factually, without performance, without waiting for a reaction. Fenner sat back in his chair. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" What happened next unfolded over the following week in the way that well-designed systems unfold, not with drama, but with the particular quiet effectiveness of a plan that has been developed by someone who understands both the problem and the institution. The 4 boys were called in separately, not together. This was Maya's first specification, and Fenner had agreed to it without needing the explanation, though she gave it anyway. Separate interviews preserved individual accountability and prevented the reinforcement of collective identity that group discipline sessions tended to produce. Each interview was conducted by Fenner with Maya present and with a parent or guardian present, and in each one, the B-Wing footage was played without comment. The footage was clear. The incident was documented. There was no room for the kind of negotiation that previous incidents had been maneuvered into. The consequences were real, not excessive. Maya had been precise about this in her proposal, because consequences that felt disproportionate would become the story instead of the behavior, but real. Suspension, mandatory behavioral counseling through the district student services office, removal from athletic activities for a specified period, which was the consequence that landed most heavily, and which Maya had included not out of punitiveness, but out of accuracy. The data on behavioral intervention in adolescent male populations with strong athletic identity was clear about what created genuine behavioral change, and symbolic consequences were not it. Each parent sat in that orange plastic chair and watched the footage. Each parent was quiet afterward, in the way parents are quiet when they have run out of the defenses they arrived with. The boy who had pushed Maya, his name was Tyler Marsh, 16 years old, a junior who had a 2.8 GPA, and a father who coached his travel baseball team every summer, sat across from her at the end of his individual session after his father had been asked to step into the hallway, and he looked at her across the table and said, with the residual bravado of someone who was not yet ready to let it go entirely, "You fell down." She looked at him for a long moment. "I let you think that," she said. She said it without heat, without satisfaction, without anything except the level precision of a woman who has taught people under genuine duress for nearly a decade. There's a difference between a thing that happens to you and a thing you allow to happen because it serves your purpose. You'll want to understand that distinction eventually. The earlier you understand it, the more useful it'll be. Tyler Marsh looked at her. Something moved through his face. Not contrition, not quite. He was not there yet, but the specific, uncomfortable recalibration of someone who has just understood that the coordinates of a situation were not what he believed they were. He did not say anything else. The intervention protocol Maya had drafted was formally adopted by Eastview Regional at the following month's administrative review. Fenner presented it to the board as a district model, not just for Eastview, but potentially for the 3 other schools in the district with documented patterns of similar behavior. The board approved it 6-1. The dissenting vote was a member who believed consequences had been insufficiently punitive, which Maya, reading the minutes, considered a predictable and manageable position. The 3 studies she had cited in the proposal were read by the district's behavioral health coordinator, who called Fenner's office and asked where the new English teacher had gotten her training. Fenner told her. The coordinator called Maya directly. They spoke for 40 minutes. The coordinator asked whether Maya would be willing to consult on implementation at the other 3 schools. Maya said she would think about it. She thought about it for 2 days and said yes. What she had not expected when she submitted her retirement paperwork at Fort Bragg and told her commanding officer she was changing classrooms was that the classroom would turn out to be the whole district. But she was not inflexible. 19 years in the Army had cured her of that. Her 11th grade English classes continued undisturbed through all of it. They were reading Hamlet in October, which was where the curriculum placed it, and which Maya had looked at with the quiet interest of someone encountering an old argument in a new form. She taught it the way she taught everything, precisely, with full attention, without condescension toward the students or reverence toward the text. She expected them to grapple with it. Most of them did. A girl named Destiny Clark, who sat in the second row and had said almost nothing for the first 6 weeks of the semester, raised her hand one afternoon during a discussion of Act 3 and said, "Why doesn't Hamlet just do it? He has the chance. He keeps waiting." The class looked at the board. Some of them looked at Maya. Maya looked at Destiny for a moment. "That," she said, "is the only question worth asking about this play." She put her marker down. What does it mean to have the capability for something and to deliberately delay the action? What does waiting accomplish that acting doesn't? The class was quiet. The good kind of quiet, the kind that means people are actually thinking. Sometimes, Maya said, waiting is the action. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone believe they understand the situation and then show them, at the moment of your choosing, that they didn't. She looked at the class. Hamlet knows this. He just can't quite commit to it. That's his problem. Destiny Clark wrote something in her notebook. In the back row, a boy who had been in that B-wing hallway 6 weeks ago and who now sat in Maya's third period class, not Tyler Marsh, one of the others, a boy named Devante who had said nothing to anyone about what had been decided in those separate sessions, looked at the whiteboard and then looked at his teacher and then slowly looked back at his notebook. He wrote 2 words, "Let happen." He stared at them for a moment. He thought about the hallway, the travel mug, the essays, the one knee. He thought about the footage that had been played in the room where his mother sat beside him and did not look at him once during the playback. He thought about what she had said in the car on the way home, which he was not ready yet to repeat to anyone, but which he had not stopped hearing. He drew a line under the 2 words. He did not know, sitting in that classroom in October with Hamlet open on his desk, that he would not be in a B-wing hallway again. Not because he had been threatened, not because the consequences had scared him, but because something had shifted in his understanding of how power actually worked, who had it, how it was used, and what it meant when someone let you think you had it and turned out to have been deciding the whole time. He did not have language for this yet. He would, eventually. Maya Torres taught at Eastview Regional for 6 years before she moved into the district coordinator role full-time. In that time, she taught approximately 360 students their junior year of English. She taught them Hamlet and Toni Morrison and James Baldwin and Tim O'Brien, and she taught them through the text and through the way she occupied a room and through 100 moments they didn't realize were instruction, that there is a difference between capability and performance, between power and noise, between the person who needs the room to know what they can do and the person who simply does it. She kept in contact with Calvin, not Calvin Price, a different Calvin, a student from her second year who had come to her office hours every Thursday for the better part of a semester and then gone on to study constitutional law and written her a letter from his first year in law, school that she had read 3 times and kept in her desk drawer. She kept in contact with Destiny Clark, who had gone to a writing program and published 2 essays in journals Maya had heard of, and one in a journal she hadn't, which she took as a good sign. She had not kept in contact with Tyler Marsh, but she had seen through the particular information network that school communities sustain across time, that he had graduated, that he had not had another incident of that kind, that he was working at his father's hardware store and coaching a little league team on weekends. She did not know if what had happened in that room with the footage playing had been the thing that changed the trajectory, or whether it was something else entirely, or whether it was simply the natural development of a person who had more capacity than his 16-year-old self had known what to do with. She thought about it occasionally. She was not sure it mattered to name it. What mattered was the room, the classroom, the conference room, the B-wing hallway, the specific, recurring human situation of someone deciding what another person was capable of based on what they could see, and being wrong in the particular way people are wrong when they confuse quietness with absence. She had been quiet her whole career. The quiet was the work. The quiet was the 8 years and the 11 cohorts and the 72-hour scenarios and the methodical, unsentimental understanding of what people could do when they understood the full scope of what they had. The quiet was every lesson she had learned from a mother who said the most dangerous person in any room was the one who had decided what they were willing to do without telling anyone. She had decided a long time ago. She had simply been waiting for the right classrooms. She found them.